Alright, this is the very first video of Chapter 1, and this is the nature of science. And so Section 1 is the method of science. And so this is just going to talk a little bit about, first of all, what is science? Science comes from the Latin meaning scientia, and just basically what that means is that it is the knowledge about events in nature. That's what scientia means. And so basically it's the process of using observation, investigation, and knowledge about the events in nature. Which kind of makes sense. What is science? We observe, we investigate. We use our knowledge to figure out things in the real world. We categorize science into different fields of investigation, which again kind of makes sense if you look at high school science, because we have life science, which studies living things. This is kind of your biology if you think about it. So like next year a lot of you will take biology class, or have already taken biology class. You have an earth space branch, which studies earth and space, and then you've got the branch that you're in right now, which is physical science, which studies matter and energy. So you've got your physics and your chemistry. Science just tries to explain the natural world. That's all it does. And so sometimes those explanations need to be modified. I like to use the example of, in history at one time we thought that the world was completely flat, and that was our theory. And of course we needed to modify that because we know that the world is not flat anymore, that it's actually, round, spherical shape. And so that's an example of an explanation that needs to be modified. So scientists learn new information, and they, by performing investigations, and they change their theories. Our steps to basically investigation is called the scientific method. There are 6 common steps to the scientific method. The first step to the scientific method that we have is basically state the problem. Obviously, if you have a problem, you probably should state. You observe something in nature, wonder why or how it occurs. Step 2. Before we jump into some giant experiment or something, we actually start researching and gathering information about our problem. So we learn as much background on the problem. Sometimes experiments have already been done to, that explore our problem. So what's the point of doing something that's already been done? Or maybe we need to take a different course to study that problem. Once we have information, we form a hypothesis, a possible explanation for that problem. Okay, so, we have this particular problem, and so, what do we know about it? What do we observe? And so we form that hypothesis. And then step 4. So notice that we've gotten all the way to step 4, and now we are actually at the testing portion. You can test a hypothesis by making observations, or you can perform experiments. Notice that I even put perform experiments as kind of the second thing. You don't actually even need to perform experiments. You can make observations. You can, notice behaviors. You can, sit on a park bench and notice how many times, people are walking by with a Pepsi to determine which is better, Pepsi or Coke. Things like that versus going into a lab and doing some giant experiment and having different conditions. You can build models. Some things we can't even, do in labs or places. We have to build a model, use computers for. So that's a good point I want to bring up here real quick, is models are just, they represent the idea or event or object to help people understand it better. They help scientists see things that we can't necessarily see while we're testing. The atom, we can't necessarily see that, so sometimes we build a model. The solar system's a good example. Models have been made all throughout history. We use computers a lot now to make models or simulations. A simulator is a great example of a model. Experiments. Experiments, if we kind of go back to talking about experiments for a second, all experiments have variables. And that's a quantity that has more than one single value. I think of variables like in math. You know how x, we have 2x equals 1. X is a variable, right? Well, sometimes x can be more than one thing, sometimes. So, but X is a variable, okay? A experiment usually has two different things that we change. We have the dependent variable, which depends on the independent variable. This value changes according to everything else. And then the independent variable is the thing that you are actually changing. You know, the amount of sunlight, the amount of chemical that you're adding, different things, the temperature, whatever it may be. We always have constants and controls within our experiments. A constant is a factor that does not change when the other variables change. So everything else in the experiment is changing, but we notice that this one thing is always staying the same throughout the entire experiment. And it's not staying the same because we are keeping it the same. It just, it's staying constant. Then we have this thing called a control, and that's what we compare all the other things to. It's very important that we make any experiment valid. And valid experiments are basically experiments that have, data that's measurable. Whether it be, we took down the number of tick marks that we saw people walk by with Pepsi, or we measured how many milliliters of something or how many meters of something. And the big thing is it has to be repeatable. So we wrote everything down in, a notebook or something so somebody could pick up our notes and redo our entire experiment and get pretty much the same results. So, and that's kind of the point of the next step is that, once we have all our data collected, it's important to analyze that data. And that's why, recording our observations, organizing our test data, especially chemists, we like charts, we like tables, we like graphs. We include all of our data, not just the unexpected results. And then, of course, scientists share their data through journals, through conferences, things like that. It's very important within experimentation itself to be objective. Bias occurs when you kind of put your own take into an experiment. I like the Pepsi Coke idea, going in and telling everybody that Coke is the best, Coke is the best, and just keep playing that, and so that you are making it so that Coke takes over your experiment. That's having a biased view on something. So scientists, it's very important to reduce your bias and making sure that you can reduce your bias by running as many experiments as you can. Then the last step is to draw conclusions based on all your data. You basically say, okay, is my hypothesis right? Is my hypothesis wrong? And so basically, for it to be correct, you just basically have to have data to support it and be able to repeat it. If it's not correct, scientists might add new steps, repeat some of the steps within your scientific method, or skip steps altogether in order to get to a correct hypothesis. If we get the same explanation over and over, we call that a theory. So a theory is an explanation of things or events based on knowledge gained from many observations and investigations. So basically, if our hypothesis is supported and is supported over and over and over, that's called a theory. And just because we have this theory doesn't mean it will never change. If new information becomes available, it will be modified. And sometimes theories that we have right now doesn't mean that, they won't change in the future. A kind of a key component to these notes right here is the very last sentence. A lot of science teachers teach that a theory becomes a law. A theory does not become a law. In physical science, theories and laws are two totally different things. So make sure that you know this. Okay? So a theory is an explanation of why something happens. So this is why. Why? So why, when you throw a ball, it goes up and it comes back down. Okay? A law is just a statement. A statement about what happens in nature. It seems to be true all the time. Laws tell you what's going to happen. For example, the law of gravity. I know that if I throw a ball up, it's going to come back down. That's the law of gravity. A theory can be used to explain a law. So I know that if I throw a ball up in the air, it's going to come back down because the force of my hand throws the ball up, and eventually the force of gravity is going to push it back down. Okay, that's the explanation of why. So just be aware of the difference between a theory and a law. That's all of section 1, and so I will be with you again in the next video.